The wail pierced the silence of the vast Wyoming territory like a knife, a sound so filled with anguish that it seemed to echo across the endless prairie. Elijah Montgomery reined in his horse sharply, his weather-beaten face turning toward the dilapidated shed nestled against a rocky outcrop. In the fading light of dusk in the summer of 1875, most men would have continued riding, eager to reach the safety of town before nightfall claimed the land. But something in that cry reached deep into Elijah's soul and held him fast. The 28-year-old cowboy dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the hard, packed earth. His stallion, Thundercloud, snorted nervously, sensing his master's tension. Elijah patted the horse's neck reassuringly before drawing his Colt revolver from its holster. "Easy now," he murmured, approaching the weathered structure cautiously. The shed looked abandoned, its wood bleached gray by countless seasons of merciless sun and bitter winters. The door hung crookedly on rusted hinges, secured by a heavy padlock that appeared newer than the structure itself. Another sob emanated from within, softer this time, as if the source of the sound had grown too weary for full-throated cries. Elijah's jaw tightened as he examined the lock. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone in there?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. "I'm not here to hurt you," Elijah continued, holstering his weapon and reaching for the lock. "I'm going to try to get you out." A whimper was the only response. Elijah looked around, finding a large rock nearby. With several powerful blows, he smashed the lock until it broke apart in his hands. The door swung open with an ominous creak, revealing the shed's dim interior. The stench hit him first: unwashed body, human waste, and despair. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Elijah made out a figure huddled in the corner, pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into the rotting wood. It was a woman, her dress torn and filthy, her face hidden behind a curtain of matted dark hair. "Madam," Elijah said softly, kneeling at the entrance, making no move to enter the small space. "I'm not going to harm you. My name is Elijah Montgomery. I'm a ranch hand at the Triple R just south of here." The woman trembled but didn't respond. Her hands, Elijah noticed, were raw and bloodied around the wrists, evidence of restraints now absent. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She raised her head slightly, just enough for Elijah to see eyes the color of summer wildflowers peering through the tangled hair. Viola," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Viola Crawford." "Miss Crawford," Elijah said gently, "would you allow me to help you out of here? I can take you somewhere safe." Viola's gaze darted past him to the open door and the expanse of land beyond. Freedom beckoned, yet fear held her rooted to the spot. "He'll come back," she said, her voice barely audible. "He always comes back." "Who will?" Elijah asked, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. "My husband," Viola replied, and the words seemed to drain what little color remained in her face. He doesn't like it when I cry, says it disturbs his peace." Elijah felt a cold fury rise within him, but he kept his expression neutral. "How long have you been in here, Miss Viola?" 3 days, I think." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe 4. It's hard to tell sometimes." Elijah's heart constricted. "Miss Viola, I won't let anyone hurt you again. Will you trust me enough to come with me?" For a long moment she remained motionless. Then, with agonizing slowness, she began to uncurl herself from the corner. Her movements were stiff, painful, as if each muscle had forgotten its purpose. As she emerged from the shadows into the last rays of daylight, Elijah saw that she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 22 or 23, though suffering had etched lines around her eyes that belonged to a much older woman. When she stood fully, Elijah had to suppress a gasp. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, hung in tatters from her thin frame. Bruises in various stages of healing marked her exposed arms, and a particularly vicious one darkened her left cheekbone. "Can you ride?" Elijah asked, offering his hand but not touching her. Viola nodded hesitantly. "I used to before." She trailed off, the memories too painful to articulate. "Thundercloud is gentle," Elijah assured her, gesturing to his chestnut stallion who stood patiently nearby. "We'll go slow." Viola took a tentative step forward, then another, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if expecting her tormentor to materialize at any moment. Elijah maintained a respectful distance, allowing her to set the pace. When they reached Thundercloud, the horse lowered his head to inspect the newcomer. Viola flinched initially, then, to Elijah's surprise, extended a trembling hand to stroke the animal's velvet nose. "He's beautiful," she whispered, the first hint of something other than fear crossing her features. "He seems to like you," Elijah observed, noticing how the normally cautious horse leaned into Viola's touch. "May I help you up?" At her nod, Elijah placed his hands at her waist, lifting her as gently as possible onto the saddle. He couldn't help but notice how light she was, as if a strong wind might carry her away. Once she was settled, he mounted behind her, careful to maintain a respectful space between them. "We'll head to my cabin," he explained, reaching around her to take the reins. "It's about an hour's ride from here, up in the foothills. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." As they rode away from the shed, Viola kept her gaze fixed forward, refusing to look back at her prison. The vast Wyoming landscape spread before them, painted in deepening purples and blues as twilight claimed the land. Stars began to appear overhead, pinpricks of light in the vast canvas of the sky. "They're so bright," Viola murmured, tilting her head back slightly. "They are," Elijah agreed, following her gaze upward. "Sometimes I think Wyoming has the most beautiful night sky in all of creation." "I'd forgotten," she said simply. They rode in silence after that, the rhythmic hoofbeats of Thundercloud creating a soothing cadence. Despite her exhaustion, Viola remained alert, her body tensing at every unfamiliar sound. Elijah found himself acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of wildflowers somehow persisting beneath the grime, the strength in her slender back as she held herself upright despite her obvious pain. As the terrain became more rugged, climbing into the pine-covered foothills, Elijah pointed out landmarks in the darkness. "There's a creek just beyond those trees," he said. "Best water you'll ever taste, and if you look to the right, you can just make out the silhouette of Widow's Peak. Local legend says a pioneer woman waited there every day for 7 years, watching for her husband to return from the gold fields." "Did he?" Viola asked, her voice small. Elijah sighed. "No, but they say she's still waiting, her spirit standing vigil on moonless nights." "That's terribly sad," Viola said. "I've always thought it was beautiful in its way," Elijah replied. "To love someone so completely that not even death could diminish it." Viola fell silent again, and Elijah wondered if he'd spoken too freely. After what she'd endured, talk of undying love must seem like cruel mockery. As they crested a rise, Elijah's cabin came into view, a sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled against the mountainside. A small corral stood empty beside it, and a thin wisp of smoke rose from the stone chimney. "You left your fire burning?" Viola asked, alarm evident in her voice. "No," Elijah said, his hand moving to his gun once more. "My friend Vincent must be visiting. He checks on the place when I'm away on longer cattle drives." As if on cue, the cabin door opened and a tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Who goes there?" A deep voice called. "It's Elijah, Vince. Put that rifle down before you shoot something important." The man laughed, lowering his weapon. "Like your thick skull. Wasn't expecting you back till tomorrow." As they drew closer, Vincent noticed Viola. "Evening, madam," he said, his tone immediately becoming more formal. Elijah dismounted first, then carefully helped Viola down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her before she could fall, supporting her weight against him. "Miss Viola needs our help, Vince," Elijah said quietly, the gravity of his tone conveying what words could not. Vincent's expression darkened as he took in Viola's condition. "I'll heat more water," he said simply, disappearing back into the cabin. "Vincent Blackwood," Elijah explained as he helped Viola toward the porch. "Best tracker in 3 territories and the only man I'd trust with my life. You're safe with him, too." The interior of the cabin was modest but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a solid table with 4 chairs, and a few pieces of well-crafted furniture. A door led to what Viola presumed was a bedroom, and a ladder ascended to a small loft. Everything was surprisingly clean and orderly for a bachelor's dwelling. Vincent was already busy at the stove, heating water in a large copper kettle. He nodded respectfully to Viola, but didn't press her with questions or unwanted attention. "I have some clothes that might fit you," Elijah said, moving toward a trunk in the corner. "They belonged to my sister before she moved east. She was about your size." He withdrew a simple brown dress, a white blouse, and some undergarments, handling them with unexpected delicacy for a man with such calloused hands. "The bedroom is yours," he continued, gesturing to the door. "There's a wash basin in there, and Vincent's heating water for a proper bath. We'll bring it in when it's ready." Viola looked at the clothes in her arms, then at the 2 men who were busying themselves with preparations, carefully avoiding staring at her. Their consideration brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay." "There's nothing to repay, Miss Viola," Elijah interrupted gently. "Now go rest a spell. You're safe here." In the bedroom, Viola found a simple iron bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small dresser topped with a mirror. She avoided her reflection, knowing the state she must be in, and instead sank onto the edge of the bed, the softness of the mattress almost painful after days on the hard, packed earth of the shed. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Viola." It was Vincent's voice. "I've got hot water for you and some soap and towels." "Just a moment," she called, moving to open the door a crack. Vincent stood there with 2 steaming buckets, his eyes respectfully averted. "Elijah's making some stew. Nothing fancy, but it's filling." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Just Vincent, madam, or Vince. Never stood on ceremony much out here." He set the buckets down by the washstand. "There's more water heating if you need it. Just call out." When he left, Viola slowly began the process of removing her filthy clothing. Each movement revealed new bruises, new reminders of her husband's cruelty. As she washed, the water in the basin turned gray, then black. She had to empty and refill it 3 times before her skin began to feel clean. The warm water soothed her aching muscles, and the simple act of washing away the grime felt like washing away a piece of her past. She unbound her hair, wincing as her fingers worked through the tangles. Without scissors, it was impossible to remove all the knots, but she managed to bring some order to the dark waves that fell to the middle of her back. When she finally dressed in the clean clothes Elijah had provided, Viola felt more human than she had in months. The dress was a bit loose, evidence of how much weight she'd lost, but the fabric was soft against her skin. A simple luxury she'd nearly forgotten. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face the mirror for the first time. The woman who stared back was a stranger hollow-cheeked, with shadows beneath her eyes and a fading bruise on her cheekbone. But beneath the marks of suffering, Viola glimpsed something she thought had been extinguished. A spark of defiance, a will to survive. "There you are," she whispered to her reflection. When she emerged from the bedroom, Elijah and Vincent were seated at the table, their conversation halting as she appeared. Both men stood immediately, an instinctive courtesy that brought an unexpected flush to Viola's cheeks. "You look much improved, Miss Viola," Elijah said, pulling out a chair for her. "I hope you're hungry. Vincent's stew isn't half bad, though he claims I can't cook worth a damn." "That's because you can't," Vincent retorted good-naturedly. "Man would burn water if left to his own devices." Their easy banter created an atmosphere of normalcy that Viola found deeply comforting. As she took her seat, Elijah served her a generous bowl of stew and placed a thick slice of bread beside it. "Eat as much as you're able," he encouraged. "There's plenty more." The first spoonful nearly overwhelmed Viola's senses: rich broth, tender meat, and vegetables cooked to perfection. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. After a few cautious bites, hunger took over, and she ate with single-minded focus. The men talked quietly while she ate, discussing ranch business and local news, careful to include her in the conversation without pressuring her to contribute. It was only when her bowl was empty that Elijah gently steered the conversation toward more difficult waters. "Miss Viola," he began, refilling her cup with fresh coffee, "I don't wish to cause you distress, but we need to know about your husband. Who is he, and where might he be now?" Viola's hands tightened around her mug. "His name is George Crawford. He owns the Mercantile in Silver Creek, about 20 miles east of here." She paused, gathering her courage. "We've been married for 2 years. He wasn't always cruel, or perhaps he was, and I was simply too naive to see it." "How did you end up in that shed?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully neutral. "George has business in Cheyenne every few months," Viola explained. "Usually he locks me in the house when he goes, but this time I defied him. He caught me trying to send a letter to my sister back east." Her voice trembled slightly. "He was so angry. Said I was trying to ruin him with lies. He took me to that abandoned homestead and locked me in the shed. Said the isolation would teach me gratitude." Elijah's expression hardened. "And the bruises?" Viola looked down at her hands. "George believes a husband has the right to discipline his wife. The law agrees with him." "The law," Vincent spat, "doesn't always align with what's right." "When is he due back from Cheyenne?" Elijah asked. "Tomorrow or the day after," Viola replied, fear creeping back into her voice. "He'll come looking for me when he finds the shed empty." "Let him come," Elijah said quietly, the steel in his voice unmistakable. "You don't understand," Viola insisted. "George has influence in these parts. The sheriff is his cousin. The judge shares his whiskey. If I don't return, he'll claim I was kidnapped. He'll have posses searching for me for us." Vincent and Elijah exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "Then perhaps it's time you disappeared," Vincent suggested. "Permanently." "What do you mean?" Viola asked. "He means," Elijah explained, "that Viola Crawford needs to cease existing, at least for a while." Hope and fear warred within Viola's chest. "How?" "My sister lives in Denver now," Elijah said. "She married well to a lawyer who specializes in cases involving women in difficult situations. If we can get you to Denver, they can help you establish a new identity, maybe even arrange passage further east if that's what you want. But first," Vincent added, "we need to make sure Crawford believes you're gone for good. Dead, preferably." Viola flinched at the word, and Elijah shot his friend a reproachful look. "What Vincent means," Elijah clarified, "is that if your husband believes you perished in an accident, he won't come looking for you." How would we convince him of that? Viola asked. Leave that to us, Vincent said. The important thing now is keeping you safe until we can make arrangements. You've both risked enough already, Viola protested. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, Elijah interrupted gently. We offered, and I, for one, couldn't live with myself if I rode away and left you to that fate. Viola looked between the two men, overwhelmed by their willingness to help a stranger. Why? She asked simply. Elijah's gaze met hers directly. Because some things are just plain wrong, Miss Viola, and a man who would lock his wife in a shed for crying is not a man at all. The conviction in his voice silenced any further protest. Instead, Viola nodded slowly, acceptance settling over her like a mantle. What happens now? She asked. Now, Vincent said, rising from the table, you rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to make plans. Vincent's right, Elijah agreed. Take my bed, I'll sleep in the loft. I couldn't possibly. You could and you will, Elijah insisted with a smile that softened his words. Doctor's orders, and I'm the closest thing to a doctor for 20 miles. Too exhausted to argue further, Viola nodded her thanks and retreated to the bedroom. Through the door, she could hear the men conversing in low tones, planning her escape, her resurrection into a new life. As she slipped beneath the quilt, the scent of pine and leather enveloped her. Elijah's scent. Strangely comforting, it followed her into dreams unmarred by fear for the first time in longer than she could remember. Dawn arrived with a golden brilliance that filled the small bedroom with light. Viola woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The softness of the bed, the clean smell of the linens, these simple comforts seemed alien after so long without them. She dressed quickly in the same clothes from the night before, running her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to tame it. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Elijah alone in the kitchen, frying bacon on the stove. Good morning, he said, his smile brightening his weather-beaten face. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in years, Viola admitted. Where is Vincent? He rode out at first light, Elijah explained, transferring the bacon to a plate. Said he needed to check on something in town. He'll be back by noon. Viola moved to the stove, instinctively taking over the preparation of breakfast. Please let me. It's the least I can do. Elijah stepped back, surrendering the spatula with a nod. I won't argue with having a competent cook in the kitchen. Coffee's already made if you'd like some. As Viola worked, cracking eggs into the bacon grease and slicing bread for toasting, she felt Elijah's eyes on her. Not in the predatory way she'd grown accustomed to from her husband, but with a kind of wondering appreciation. You move like you've done this 1,000 times, he observed. I was the eldest of 5. Viola explained, flipping an egg with practiced ease. My mother taught me to cook as soon as I could reach the stove on a stool. Where is your family now? Viola's movements faltered slightly. My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. My siblings were scattered to various relatives. My youngest sister, Lily, lives with our aunt in Boston. She swallowed hard. The letter George caught me writing was to her. I haven't seen her since before my parents died. Elijah's expression softened with understanding. Family has a way of anchoring us to the world. I'm sorry you've been separated from yours. What about your family? Viola asked, eager to shift the focus from her losses. My parents' ranch is about a day's ride south of here, Elijah replied. The Triple R Rocking Ridge Ranch. My father built it from nothing after the war. My brother runs it now with his wife and their children. My sister, as I mentioned, moved to Denver when she married. And you? Viola asked, serving the eggs onto plates. Why don't you live at the ranch? A shadow crossed Elijah's face. I did until 2 years ago. There was a disagreement between my father and me. Nothing dramatic, just different visions for the future. I still work there, training horses mainly, but I needed my own space. They sat down to eat, the conversation flowing more easily than Viola would have thought possible with a man she'd known for less than a day. Elijah had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures of frontier life that occasionally drew genuine laughter from Viola, a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled her the first time it escaped. After breakfast, Elijah showed her around the small property. The cabin sat on 10 acres of land, with a view of the valley below that took Viola's breath away. A small garden plot behind the house contained vegetables and herbs, and a natural spring provided clear, cold water year-round. "It's beautiful," Viola said sincerely, taking in the wildflowers that carpeted the meadow surrounding the cabin. "So peaceful." "That's why I chose it," Elijah agreed. "A man can think up here, away from the noise and demands of others. Don't you get lonely?" Viola asked, immediately regretting the personal question, but Elijah didn't seem offended. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've found there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Most days I prefer my own company and that of the animals." He smiled ruefully. "Vincent says I'm turning into a hermit before my time." As they walked back toward the cabin, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Vincent was returning, but he wasn't alone. Another rider accompanied him, a woman dressed in men's clothing, her dark hair braided down her back. "Eva Harris," Elijah explained, noticing Viola's questioning look. "Widow who runs the apothecary in Silver Creek, best herbalist in the territory." Viola tensed at the mention of Silver Creek. "She knows your husband," Elijah added, seemingly reading her thoughts. "And by all accounts despises him thoroughly." Eva dismounted with the fluid grace of a lifelong rider, her keen eyes immediately finding Viola. "So this is our resurrection project," she said without preamble, her voice surprisingly gentle despite her blunt words. "Vincent told me what happened. That husband of yours is a menace, girl. Been treating the women of Silver Creek for his handiwork for years." Viola blinked in surprise. I thought I was the only one." Eva snorted. "Men like Crawford spread their poison widely. Before you, it was the saloon girls. Before them, the immigrant women who couldn't speak enough English to complain." She shook her head in disgust. "But we're going to see he doesn't hurt anyone else, starting with you." The four of them gathered around Elijah's table, where Vincent unrolled a map of the territory. "Crawford returns from Cheyenne tomorrow," he began, pointing to a trail marked on the map. "He'll take the stage to Rawlins, then hire a horse to ride the last stretch to Silver Creek. This section of trail follows the river and passes through Devil's Canyon." His finger tapped a narrow passage. "It's notorious for rockslides and ambushes." "You're not suggesting," Viola began, alarmed. "We're not going to kill him," Elijah assured her quickly, "though the thought has crossed my mind. What we need," Eva explained, "is evidence that you perished in an accident. Something convincing enough that even Crawford won't question it." "I've been collecting items since dawn," Vincent said, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a tattered piece of fabric that Viola recognized with a chill, a scrap of her blue calico dress, the one she'd been wearing in the shed. "Found this caught on a branch near the shed," Vincent explained. "And this." He produced a woman's boot, mudded and worn, not Viola's, but similar enough to what she might have worn. "We stage an accident," Eva continued. "A woman's body washed downstream after a fall into the river. Too damaged by rocks and water to be identified clearly, but with enough personal effects to suggest it was Viola Crawford." "But there is no body," Viola pointed out. Eva's smile was grim. "Coyotes and other scavengers are unfortunately common." All that remains are fragments of clothing, perhaps a lock of hair and a boot containing, well, what one might expect to find in a boot after such a tragedy. Viola felt ill at the implication but understood the necessity. And Crawford will believe this. He'll believe it because the discovery will be made by none other than Silver Creek's own deputy marshal, Vincent said with satisfaction, who happens to owe me a considerable favor. Reed Wilson, Elijah asked, surprised. I wouldn't have thought him willing to cross Crawford. Reed's sister was one of Crawford's victims before he married Viola, Eva explained quietly. She took her own life 6 months ago. Reed has been looking for a way to even the score without losing his badge. The pieces of the plan fell into place with a precision that both reassured and frightened Viola. These 3 virtual strangers were risking everything to free her from a monster crafting an elaborate deception that, if discovered, could result in their imprisonment or worse. Once Crawford believes you're dead, we move to the next phase, Elijah explained. I'll take you to Denver to my sister and her husband. They can help you establish a new identity, find work, perhaps even reconnect with your sister in Boston eventually. What about you? Viola asked, looking at each of them in turn. Won't Crawford suspect your involvement? You'll be in danger. I'm hardly ever in town, Elijah said dismissively. And when I found you, I was returning from delivering horses to a ranch near the Montana border. Several people saw me there, 100 miles from where your accident will occur. I'll be safely away in Cheyenne when the news breaks, Eva added. Quarterly trip to restock my supplies, very routine. And I, Vincent said with a grin, will be the grieving friend who helps identify what little remains, confirming Crawford's worst fears. My presence at the scene will be entirely appropriate. The thoroughness of their planning left Viola momentarily speechless. She had spent 2 years believing herself utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Now, in the space of a day, she had found not just help but true allies. I don't know what to say, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. Say you'll live a full and happy life once you're free, Eva replied, reaching across the table to grasp Viola's hand. That's all the thanks any of us need. As the day progressed, final preparations were made. Eva examined Viola's injuries, providing salves and tinctures to speed her healing. Vincent rode back to town to set the plan in motion, arranging for Deputy Wilson to discover the tragic scene the following evening after Crawford's return. Elijah, meanwhile, prepared for the journey to Denver. It would take nearly a week of careful travel, avoiding main roads and settlements where news of Viola Crawford's death might have spread. We'll leave tomorrow at nightfall, he told Viola as they stood on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains. Travel by night for the first few days just to be safe. What about your work at the ranch? Viola asked. Won't your absence be noticed? Elijah shrugged. I told the foreman I was tracking a particular wild stallion I've had my eye on. Could take weeks to find him, let alone gentle him. No one will question it. You've thought of everything, Viola marveled. Not everything, Elijah admitted. There's still the matter of your new name. Viola Crawford needs to disappear completely. Viola considered this, the idea of shedding her identity like an outgrown skin. Her name was one of the few things from her former life that she still cherished, chosen by her mother for the tiny purple flowers that had carpeted the meadow where she was born. I don't know, she said hesitantly. I've never been anyone but Viola. Elijah studied her thoughtfully. What about Virginia? He suggested. You could keep your initial at least. Virginia, Viola repeated, testing the sound of it. It's pretty, but it doesn't feel like me. Then we'll find something that does, Elijah assured her. You have time to decide. The important thing is that you'll be free to choose for yourself." As night fell, Eva departed for her own home, promising to return in a month's time to check on Viola's progress in Denver. Vincent remained at the cabin, taking the first watch while Elijah rested. Alone in the bedroom, Viola found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Tomorrow, Viola Crawford would die, and someone new would be born from the ashes of her former life. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Viola." Elijah's voice was low. "Are you awake?" "Yes," she replied, sitting up. "Come in." He entered, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. "I've been thinking about your name," he said, sitting at the edge of the bed. "And I remembered something my mother once told me about new beginnings." He unwrapped the package, revealing a small leather-bound book. "My mother's journal," he explained. "She started a new one with each major change in her life, when she married, when each of her children was born, when we moved west." He opened it carefully to a marked page. "This passage always stayed with me." In the soft lamplight, he read, "To rename oneself is perhaps the most profound act of self-determination. It is to say, I am not merely what others have called me, I am what I choose to become." Viola felt tears prick her eyes at the simple beauty of the words. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "The wisest I've ever known," Elijah agreed, closing the book. "Which is why I thought you might consider the name she always said she would have chosen for herself, had she been brave enough to start again." "What name was that?" Viola asked. "Valentia," Elijah replied. "It means brave or strong in Latin. My mother was a school teacher before she married." "Valentia," Viola repeated, the syllables flowing like music. Something about it resonated deep within her, a name that felt both new and somehow familiar. "I like it." "It suits you," Elijah said softly. "You are brave, Viola, braver than you know." Their eyes met in the dim light, and Viola felt something shift between them, a current of understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. In Elijah's gaze, she saw not pity but genuine admiration, and it kindled a warmth in her chest that she had thought long extinguished. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning far more than the name. Elijah nodded, seeming to understand all she couldn't say. "Try to get some rest," he advised, rising. "Tomorrow begins your new life, Valentia." As he left, Valentia lay back against the pillows, the new name settling around her like a protective cloak. For the first time in years, she fell asleep with hope in her heart. The following day passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. Vincent departed before dawn to execute his part of the plan, leaving Elijah and the newly christened Valentia to ready themselves for the journey ahead. By mid-afternoon, they had packed the essentials: food, clothing, medical supplies, and a small amount of money that Elijah insisted was just gathering dust anyway. Thundercloud was joined by a gentle mare named Willow, purchased months earlier as a project horse that Elijah had rehabilitated after an injury. "She's steady and sure-footed," Elijah explained as he adjusted the mare's saddle. "Perfect for the mountain trails we'll be taking." Valentia approached the horse cautiously, still uncertain around animals after so long confined. Willow turned her head, regarding the woman with liquid brown eyes that seemed to contain infinite patience. "She's beautiful," Valentia said, slowly extending her hand. "She's yours," Elijah replied simply. "Every woman needs her own mount in this country." Valentia started to protest the generosity of the gift, but the words died on her lips as Willow nuzzled her palm, accepting her with a gentle wicker. "I think she's chosen you," Elijah observed with a smile. As sunset approached, they received word via a young ranch hand, one of Vincent's trusted network, that the plan had been set in motion. George Crawford had returned to Silver Creek to find his wife missing from the shed. His rage had been monumental, but short-lived, as Deputy Wilson arrived just hours later with the grim news of a woman's remains discovered in the river. "It's done," Elijah told Valentia as the messenger departed. "By now, Crawford believes you're dead. Viola Crawford exists only in memory." Valentia absorbed this information with a strange mixture of relief and grief. Though her marriage had become a prison, there was something profoundly unsettling about hearing of one's own death, even a fabricated one. "What if he doesn't believe it?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if he suspects?" "Vincent said the evidence was convincing," Elijah assured her. "And Crawford's not the type to question what's convenient for him. A dead wife causes far fewer complications than a runaway one." The brutality of this truth silenced further questions. As darkness fell, they mounted their horses and set off toward the south, taking a little-used trail that would eventually connect with the road to Denver. The night was clear, a canopy of stars lighting their way as effectively as any lantern. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. For Valentia, each hoofbeat carried her further from her past and into an uncertain future. The woman who had entered that shed was gone, broken by cruelty and despair. The woman who emerged, who now rode tall despite her lingering physical pain, was someone new, someone still taking shape. Occasionally, Elijah would point out landmarks or share stories of the land they traversed. His deep knowledge of the territory and its history created a rich tapestry that helped distract Valentia from her anxieties. "See that formation to the west?" he asked, as they paused to rest the horses near midnight. "The Paiute believe it's the petrified remains of a great snake that once threatened their people. A brave warrior tricked it into swallowing a burning coal, and it turned to stone as it writhed in agony." "It does look like a serpent," Valentia agreed, studying the twisted rocks silhouetted against the night sky. "Do you believe the legend?" Elijah smiled. "I believe all good stories contain truth, even if it's not the kind that can be proven. The Paiute have lived on this land for countless generations. They understand it in ways we newcomers can only glimpse." They continued their journey through the night, stopping just before dawn to make camp in a sheltered grove of aspens. Elijah efficiently set up a small tent for Valentia, insisting that he was comfortable sleeping under the stars. "I'll keep watch while you rest," he said, checking his rifle. "We're still too close to Silver Creek for comfort." Exhausted from the long ride, Valentia didn't argue. The tent was simple but offered precious privacy, something she had been denied for so long that she had almost forgotten its value. As she settled onto the bedroll, sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of Elijah moving around the camp. The quality of light filtering through the canvas told her it was late afternoon. "You should have woken me sooner," she said, emerging from the tent to find Elijah cooking breakfast over a small, nearly smokeless fire. "You needed the rest," he replied, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "Besides, we'll be traveling by night again. Better to sleep during daylight hours." As they ate, Elijah unfolded a map, tracing their planned route with his finger. "We'll follow this creek south for another 15 miles, then cut east through Henderson Pass. It's less traveled than the main roads and will keep us away from settlements where news might have spread." "How long until Denver?" Valentia asked. 5 days if the weather holds and we make good time," Elijah replied. "My sister is expecting us." "I sent a message with a trusted friend who was heading that way on business." Valentia studied his face in the golden light of late afternoon. Despite having slept little, if at all, Elijah showed no signs of fatigue. His eyes remained alert, his movements efficient. Yet there was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior, evident in the way he cared for the horses, in his consideration for her comfort, in the patience with which he answered her endless questions. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked suddenly. "You could have simply taken me to the nearest town, left me at a church or a women's aid society. Why risk so much for a stranger?" Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames of their small fire. "When I was 16, he finally said, my cousin Abigail married a man named Thomas Blackwell. He seemed decent enough at first, prosperous farmer, active in the church. But something in him changed after the wedding." His jaw tightened at the memory. "He kept her isolated, controlled her every movement. When she finally managed to send word to us about the beatings, my father and uncle rode out to confront him." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "We were too late. Blackwell had locked her in the root cellar after a particularly savage beating. She died down there, alone in the dark." The pain in his voice was raw, even after all these years. "I was the one who found her. I've never forgotten the look on her face, the despair, the resignation. As if she'd given up hope that anyone would ever come for her." Valentia felt tears well in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Elijah. When I heard you crying in that shed," he continued, meeting her gaze directly, "it was like hearing Abigail's ghost. I couldn't ride away, not again, not ever again." The confession hung between them, a bridge of shared understanding. Valentia reached across the space separating them and gently placed her hand over his. "You saved me," she said simply. "Not just my life, but my spirit. I had forgotten there were good men in the world." Elijah turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. "There are," he assured her, "and you deserve nothing less." As the sun began to set, they broke camp and continued their journey. The night was warmer than the previous one, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and pine. They rode side by side where the trail allowed, their conversation flowing more easily with each passing hour. Valentia found herself sharing stories of her childhood memories, long suppressed under the weight of her marriage. She told Elijah about her father, a skilled carpenter who had taught her to appreciate the grain of wood and the satisfaction of creating something with one's hands. She spoke of her mother's garden, the recipes handed down through generations, the lullabies sung to each of her siblings in turn. In return, Elijah shared tales of the Triple R, the yearly cattle drives, the wild horses he gentled, the changing seasons on the high prairie. He spoke of his mother's love of poetry and his father's unwavering integrity, of his brother's ambitious plans for the ranch and his sister's determined pursuit of education, despite societal expectations. Through these exchanges, a deeper connection formed between them, one rooted not in the trauma that had brought them together, but in genuine affinity and growing admiration. On the third night of their journey, they encountered their first significant challenge. A late spring storm rolled in unexpectedly, bringing driving rain and dangerous lightning that forced them to seek immediate shelter. "There's an old line shack about a mile east," Elijah shouted over the worsening downpour. "Used during cattle drives. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry." They pushed through the storm, the horses struggling against the mud and wind. By the time they reached the shack, little more than a one-room cabin with a sagging roof, they were both drenched to the skin and chilled to the bone. Elijah worked quickly to secure the horses in the attached lean-to before joining Valentia inside. The interior was spare but sound, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow bed frame, and a rough-hewn table with a single chair. "We're in luck," Elijah announced, finding a stack of dry firewood beside the hearth. The last occupants left us a gift. Within minutes, he had a fire crackling in the grate, its warmth beginning to chase away the damp chill. Valentia stood near the flames, shivering in her wet clothing. "You need to get out of those wet things," Elijah said practically, rummaging through his saddlebags. "Here." He handed her a dry shirt and pair of trousers. "They'll be too big, but they're warm." Valentia hesitated, suddenly acutely aware of the intimacy of their situation. Elijah, sensing her discomfort, immediately moved toward the door. "I'll check on the horses again," he said. "Take your time." When he returned some minutes later, Valentia had changed into his clothing, the sleeves rolled up multiple times and the trousers cinched tightly at the waist. She had spread her wet garments near the fire to dry and was attempting to comb through her damp hair with her fingers. Elijah, still in his own wet clothes, smiled at the sight. "You look like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothing," he observed, the warmth in his eyes belying any insult. Valentia laughed a free, unguarded sound that surprised them both. "I must look ridiculous." "Not ridiculous," Elijah corrected, his voice softening. "Never that." Their eyes met across the small room, and something electric passed between them, a current of attraction neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. Valentia felt her cheeks warm, and it had nothing to do with the fire. Elijah cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I should change as well," he said, gathering dry clothing from his pack. Valentia turned her back, giving him privacy, though she remained intensely aware of his presence, the soft rustle of fabric, the measured rhythm of his breathing. When he told her it was safe to turn around, she found him standing awkwardly by the table, his wet clothes now hanging beside hers. "The storm shows no sign of letting up," he observed, moving to the single window to peer into the darkness. "We might be here until morning." The implications hung silently between them. One small room, one narrow bed, two people increasingly aware of each other as more than traveling companions. "I'll sleep on the floor," Elijah said firmly, already spreading his bedroll before the fire. "You take the bed." "That's not necessary," Valentia protested. "I'm smaller. The floor makes more sense for me. My mother would rise from her grave and haunt me if I allowed a lady to sleep on the floor while I took the bed," Elijah replied with a hint of humor. "Please, Valentia, I insist." The use of her new name spoken with such natural ease, as if he had always called her, thus silenced further argument. She nodded her acceptance and helped him prepare a makeshift pallet as comfortable as they could manage with their limited supplies. As the night deepened, the storm raged on, rain pounding against the roof and wind howling around the eaves. They sat before the fire, sharing the last of their jerky and a tin of peaches Elijah had been saving for a special occasion. "Not exactly the fine dining experience I'd hoped to offer," he joked, passing her the can. "It's perfect," Valentia replied sincerely, savoring the sweet fruit. "I can't remember the last time food tasted this good." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the shack's timbers, causing Valentia to start nervously. "It's sturdier than it looks," Elijah assured her. "These lined shacks are built to withstand Wyoming winters. A spring storm is nothing to them." Despite his reassurance, Valentia remained tense, each crack of thunder causing her to flinch. Elijah watched her with growing concern. "The storm frightens you," he observed gently. Valentia attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "George always. He would use the noise of storms to cover." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Understanding dawned in Elijah's expression, followed by a flash of anger quickly suppressed. Without a word, he moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not so close as to crowd her. "Would it help if I told you stories?" he asked. My mother always said a good story can transport you anywhere you wish to go. Valentia nodded gratefully. I'd like that very much. And so, as the storm raged outside, Elijah wove tales of the West, of brave explorers and foolish tenderfoots, of cattle drives and gold rushes, of friendships forged in adversity and unlikely heroes who rose to meet extraordinary challenges. His deep voice created a cocoon of safety that gradually eased Valentia's fears, until she found herself leaning against his shoulder, her eyelids growing heavy. "You should sleep," Elijah murmured, noticing her drowsiness. "The bed's all ready for you." Half asleep already, Valentia shook her head, unwilling to move from the comfort of his presence. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." For a moment, Elijah remained perfectly still. Then, with infinite gentleness, he shifted to accommodate her more comfortably against him, one arm coming around her shoulders in a protective embrace. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised softly. Valentia drifted into sleep with the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, more secure than she had felt in years. In her last moments of consciousness, a realization formed with perfect clarity. She was falling in love with this quiet, honorable man who had rescued her from darkness. The thought should have terrified her love had proven a dangerous illusion before. Yet somehow, with Elijah, fear gave way to a fragile hope that perhaps, in her new life as Valentia, love might be something healing rather than harmful. Morning arrived with gentle persistence, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window to paint golden patterns across the rough-hewn floor. Valentia woke slowly, disoriented to find herself still beside the fireplace, a blanket tucked carefully around her. Elijah was nowhere to be seen, though the sound of movement outside suggested he was tending to the horses. She sat up, running her fingers through her tangled hair and taking stock of her surroundings. Her clothes, now dry, had been neatly folded and placed on the table alongside a tin cup of fresh water. The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture brought an unexpected lump to her throat. The door opened, admitting Elijah along with a gust of fresh, rain-washed air. "You're awake," he observed with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Valentia admitted, suddenly self-conscious about having spent the night in his arms. "Thank you for staying with me." A faint color rose in Elijah's cheeks. "It was no hardship," he replied simply. There was an awkward moment as they regarded each other, neither quite sure how to navigate the subtle shift in their relationship. Then Elijah cleared his throat and gestured outside. The storm's passed. Skies clear as crystal, though the trails will be muddy. "If you're feeling up to it, we should get moving. We've lost some time." Grateful for the return to practicalities, Valentia nodded. "I'll be ready in a few minutes." They set out under a brilliant blue sky, the landscape transformed by the night's downpour. Wildflowers that had been mere buds the day before had unfurled in vibrant response to the rain, carpeting the meadows in swathes of color. The air felt scrubbed clean, carrying the mingled scents of wet earth, pine and sun-warmed grass. "It's like the world has been reborn," Valentia marveled, breathing deeply. "That's the miracle of spring in the high country," Elijah agreed. "One good rain can change everything overnight." The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Valentia felt her own transformation mirrored in the landscape, the darkness and fear of her past washed away, making space for new growth and possibility. They made good progress, despite the muddy conditions, pushing the horses as much as was safe to make up for lost time. By nightfall, they had reached Henderson Pass, a narrow route through the mountains that would lead them eventually to the plains surrounding Denver. "We'll camp here tonight," Elijah decided, indicating a level spot sheltered by towering pines. The pass can be tricky in the dark, even in good conditions. As they made camp with the efficiency born of practice, Valentia found herself watching Elijah, the sure movements of his hands as he unsaddled the horses, the quiet authority with which he assessed their surroundings, the gentleness he showed to both animals and herself. Everything about him spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin, uninterested in dominance for its own sake. Over their simple dinner, Elijah spread his map again, tracing the remainder of their route. We should reach my sister's home by the day after tomorrow, assuming no more unexpected delays. Valentia felt a pang at the thought of their journey ending so soon. These days on the trail, despite their purpose and the lingering shadow of danger, had been among the happiest she could remember. With Elijah, she had rediscovered parts of herself long suppressed: her humor, her curiosity, her capacity for joy in simple pleasures. "What will happen when we reach Denver?" she asked, voicing the question that had been growing increasingly urgent in her mind. Elijah looked up from the map, his expression thoughtful. "My sister and her husband will help you establish your new identity papers, background, whatever you need to start fresh. They have connections that make such things possible." "And then," Valentia pressed. "Then you'll be free to choose your own path," Elijah replied. "You might stay in Denver, find work there, or perhaps travel further east, maybe even to Boston to be near your sister eventually." "What about you?" The question emerged more vulnerable than she had intended. Elijah's gaze softened. "I'll return to Wyoming. The ranch needs me, especially with summer coming." The answer was exactly what Valentia had expected, yet it still struck her with the force of disappointment. Of course, Elijah would return to his life. Their paths had crossed by chance, their connection forged in extraordinary circumstances. To expect more was foolish. "I understand," she said, striving to keep her voice neutral. "You've already done more than I could ever repay." Elijah studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. Whatever he saw caused him to set aside the map and move closer, until they sat side by side before the fire. "Valentia," he began, her name a caress on his lips, "I didn't rescue you with any expectation of repayment. What happens after Denver? That's for you to decide. Your life has been controlled by others for too long. I won't be another man telling you what your future should be." The consideration behind his words touched her deeply. "But what if my decision involves you?" she asked quietly, gathering her courage. "What if I don't want our paths to diverge in Denver?" Elijah's breath caught audibly. For a long moment he was silent, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames of their campfire. When he finally spoke, his voice was husky with emotion. "Then I would consider myself the most fortunate of men," he said simply. "But Valentia, you've only just escaped one man's control. I fear you might confuse gratitude with deeper feelings." "You think me incapable of knowing my own heart?" she challenged gently. "No," he conceded. "But I think the heart needs time to heal before it can choose wisely." Valentia couldn't argue with his logic, yet she felt a certainty that transcended rational thought. In Elijah Montgomery, she had found not just a rescuer but a man who truly saw her for who she was and who she could become. "Will you give me something then?" she asked. "Anything within my power," he replied without hesitation. "Time," Valentia said. "Not just these few days on the trail, but real time. Stay in Denver at least for a while. Let me discover who Valentia is, who she wants to be, and let us discover if what's growing between us can flourish in ordinary days, not just extraordinary ones." Elijah considered her request, his expression serious. "The ranch will still be there in a month or two," Valentia finished for him. "You said yourself your brother runs it now. Surely you can spare a little time." A slow smile spread across Elijah's face, transforming his features with boyish charm. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse? Besides," he added with a touch of mischief, "I've been meaning to visit my sister for ages. Ellen will be delighted to have me underfoot for a while." Relief and joy mingled in Valentia's chest. "Then it's settled. We'll have time." "Time," Elijah agreed, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "And whatever comes of it, know this. Meeting you has changed me, Valentia. Whatever happens between us, I will never regret the day I heard your cry and stopped to listen." The sincerity in his voice moved her beyond words. Acting on impulse, Valentia leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless contained the promise of deeper passion. When she pulled back, Elijah's eyes had darkened, his breathing slightly uneven. "That," he said softly, "was worth waiting for." They spent the remainder of the evening in conversation that ranged from the profound to the mundane, discovering shared tastes in literature and music, debating good-naturedly about politics, exchanging favorite childhood memories. With each revelation, the connection between them deepened, transcending the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting to root itself in genuine compatibility. As they prepared for sleep, Elijah again insisting on taking the ground, while Valentia used the bedroll, a comfortable ease had replaced the earlier tension. Whatever lay ahead in Denver, they would face it together, allowing their relationship to unfold at its own pace. The next day dawned clear and warm, perfect conditions for traversing Henderson Pass. The trail narrowed as they climbed, requiring them to ride single file through sections where sheer rock faces rose on one side and steep drop-offs threatened on the other. "Stay close," Elijah cautioned as they entered a particularly treacherous stretch. "This part of the trail is prone to rockslides, especially after heavy rain." Valentia followed his lead, trusting in both his knowledge of the terrain and Willow's sure-footedness. The mare moved with calm confidence, placing each hoof with deliberate care on the narrow path. They were halfway through the pass when disaster struck. A movement on the ridge above caught Elijah's attention seconds before a cascade of rocks and dirt thundered down toward them. He shouted a warning, spurring Thundercloud forward out of the danger zone. Valentia reacted instantly, urging Willow to follow, but a falling boulder struck the trail just ahead of them. The mare reared in panic, nearly unseating her rider. Valentia clung desperately to the saddle horn as Willow danced backward, dangerously close to the edge of the trail. "Hold on," Elijah yelled, wheeling Thundercloud around. In one fluid motion, he dismounted and approached the frightened mare, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy, girl. Easy now. You're all right." Willow's ears flicked toward him, her panicked movements slowing as she responded to his calm authority. Gradually, she allowed him to take hold of her bridle and guide her away from the precipice. "Are you hurt?" Elijah asked Valentia, his voice tight with concern. Still shaking from the near miss, she managed to shake her head. "Just frightened. Willow saved us both." "She's a good horse," Elijah agreed, stroking the mare's neck. "Brave like her rider." Once they had calmed the horses and assessed that the trail ahead was safe to proceed, they continued their journey, more cautious than before. By midday, they had cleared the pass and descended into gentler terrain, rolling hills that would eventually give way to the plains surrounding Denver. "We'll make better time now," Elijah said as they paused to rest the horses beside a clear running stream. "With luck, we'll reach my sister's by tomorrow afternoon." Valentia nodded, though the prospect of arriving in Denver no longer filled her with unalloyed joy. Despite the danger they had just faced, there was a freedom to this nomadic existence that appealed to her. Just the two of them, the open sky and endless possibilities stretching before them. "What is your sister like?" she asked, distracting herself from melancholy thoughts. Elijah smiled fondly. "Ellen is the smartest person I know. Stubborn as the day is long, with opinions on everything under the sun. She scandalized half the territory by insisting on attending university back east, then doubled down by marrying a man who encourages her intellectual pursuits rather than demanding she confine herself to hearth and home." "She sounds wonderful," Valentia said sincerely. "She is," Elijah agreed. "Though I'd appreciate if you didn't mention I said so. She's insufferable enough without the encouragement." Valentia laughed at the familiar sibling dynamic, so similar to her own relationship with her brothers and sisters. "Your secret is safe with me." They camped that night in a meadow ablaze with wildflowers, their last night on the trail before reaching civilization. After dinner, they sat side by side watching the stars emerge, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. Finally, Valentia spoke. "Elijah, there's something I need to tell you about my marriage to George." He turned toward her, his expression open and attentive. "You don't owe me any explanations, Valentia." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged, "but I want you to understand. I need you to understand." Taking a deep breath, she continued. "I was 19 when we met. My parents had recently died, and I was desperate to keep my siblings together. George seemed kind at first, successful enough to provide a home for all of us. He promised to help find positions for my older brothers and to keep my younger sisters with us until they were grown." She paused, the memories still painful despite the distance she had gained. "The change came immediately after the wedding. He sent my brothers away, one to a logging camp in Oregon, the other to work on the railroad. My sisters were separated and sent to distant relatives. He said it was for the best, that they would have more opportunities elsewhere." "He isolated you," Elijah observed quietly. Valentia nodded. "Completely. We moved to Silver Creek, where I knew no one. He controlled every aspect of my life, what I wore, whom I spoke to, when I could leave the house. The first time he struck me was 3 months after our wedding, when I received a letter from my sister without his permission." "Valentia," Elijah began, his voice pained, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Please let me finish. I need to say this." She took another steadying breath. "The beatings became regular, usually for infractions so minor I couldn't predict them. But worse than the physical pain was the isolation, the constant fear, the feeling that I had somehow deserved his treatment." Her voice broke slightly. "He made me believe I was worthless, Elijah, and I accepted it because I thought I had no choice, nowhere to go." Elijah reached for her hand, enfolding it in his own. "You didn't deserve any of it," he said fiercely. "None of it was your fault." "I know that now," Valentia replied, squeezing his hand gratefully. "But I needed you to know why I might need patience. Why trust doesn't come easily to me anymore." Understanding dawned in Elijah's expression. "This is about what's growing between us." "Yes," she admitted. "I care for you, Elijah, more than I thought possible after everything that's happened, but I'm afraid not of you but of myself. Of making another mistake, of seeing only what I want to see." Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice was steady with conviction. "Valentia, listen to me. You survived something that would have broken many people. The fact that you can still open your heart at all is a testament to your courage." He shifted to face her fully. "I don't expect or want blind trust. I want to earn your confidence day by day through actions rather than words, and I'm prepared to wait as long as that takes." The simple sincerity of his declaration moved Valentia deeply. This was no grand romantic gesture, no passionate declaration of undying love. It was something far more valuable, a promise of respect, of patience, of understanding. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning forward to rest her forehead against his. "For hearing me, for seeing me." They remained thus for several heartbeats, sharing breath and silent communion. Then, with gentle deliberation, Elijah tilted his head to capture her lips with his own. Unlike their first kiss, this one lingered, deepening gradually as Valentia responded with growing confidence. When they finally separated, both were breathing unevenly, their eyes reflecting the same mixture of desire and wonder. "We should rest," Elijah said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Valentia nodded, though she made no move to rise. "Elijah, would you hold me tonight? Just hold me." Without a word, he arranged their bedrolls side by side, then opened his arms in invitation. Valentia settled against him, her head resting on his chest, his heart beat a steady rhythm beneath her ear. His arms encircled her loosely, protective without being constraining. "Sleep well, Valentia," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You too, Elijah," she replied, closing her eyes. As sleep claimed her, Valentia felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges awaited them in Denver and beyond, this moment of connection, this feeling of being truly seen and accepted, was something no one could take from her. The journey to Denver the following day was swift and uneventful. As they descended from the foothills onto the plains, the landscape gradually transformed. Scattered homesteads gave way to more densely populated areas, until finally the city itself appeared on the horizon, a growing metropolis that represented both opportunity and uncertainty for Valentia. "It's bigger than I expected," she observed as they approached the outskirts. "Denver's growing faster than almost anywhere else in the West," Elijah explained. "The railroads have made it a hub for trade and travel. Ellen says there's a new building going up every day." They entered the city proper in late afternoon, navigating streets crowded with wagons, carriages, and pedestrians. Valentia found herself overwhelmed by the noise and activity after days of wilderness solitude. She stayed close to Elijah, grateful for his steady presence as they made their way through the unfamiliar urban landscape. Ellen Montgomery Harrington lived with her husband, James, in a handsome brick house in one of Denver's more established neighborhoods. As Elijah and Valentia approached, the front door opened, revealing a tall, auburn-haired woman whose resemblance to Elijah was immediately apparent. "You're late," she called by way of greeting, descending the porch steps with a wide smile that belied her admonishing tone. "Ran into some weather," Elijah replied, dismounting and enveloping his sister in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. "It's good to see you, Ellie." "Put me down, you oaf," Ellen laughed, though she returned his embrace with equal enthusiasm before turning her attention to Valentia. "And you must be our guest. Welcome to Denver, my dear." There was such genuine warmth in her welcome that Valentia felt an immediate easing of the tension that had built during their entry into the city. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Harrington." "Ellen, please," the woman insisted, coming forward to help Valentia dismount. "We don't stand on ceremony in this house, and I'm delighted you're here. Any friend of my brother's is welcome, especially one who keeps him out of trouble." "I think it might be the other way around," Valentia admitted with a small smile. Ellen's eyes sparkled with approval. "Even better. He could use someone to challenge him now and then." She linked her arm through Valentia's. "Come inside. You must be exhausted after your journey. James is at his office until dinner, so we have time to get you settled and hear all about your adventures." The interior of the Harrington home was elegant yet comfortable, decorated with a tasteful blend of Eastern refinement and Western practicality. Ellen showed Valentia to a guest room on the second floor, a spacious chamber furnished with a four-poster bed, a writing desk, and a small sitting area near the window. "The bathroom is just down the hall," Ellen explained. "It has hot running water, James's pride and joy. He installed the pipes himself, with considerable assistance from the plumber." Her eyes twinkled with affectionate amusement. "My husband fancies himself quite the handyman, despite evidence to the contrary." "It's all wonderful," Valentia said sincerely, overwhelmed by the luxury after their days on the trail. "I don't know how to thank you for your hospitality." Ellen waved away her gratitude. "Think nothing of it. Elijah's letter explained enough of your circumstances for me to understand you've been through a terrible ordeal. Consider this house your sanctuary for as long as you need it." The simple kindness of this acceptance, offered without demand for further explanation or justification, brought unexpected tears to Valentia's eyes. Ellen, observing her emotion with compassionate understanding, simply squeezed her hand. "Rest a while," she suggested. "There are fresh towels and soap for bathing, and I've laid out some clothes that should fit you well enough until we can arrange for more. Dinner will be at 7. Left alone, Valentia took full advantage of the promised bath, soaking in steaming water until her travel-weary muscles relaxed, and the last vestiges of trail dust disappeared down the drain. The clothes Ellen had provided, a simple but well-made burgundy dress and fresh undergarments, fit surprisingly well, requiring only minor adjustments. As she brushed her hair before the mirror, Valentia studied her reflection with curious detachment. The woman who gazed back at her seemed both familiar and strange, thinner than she had been before her marriage, certainly, with shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of recent hardship. Yet there was also a strength in her face that hadn't been there before, a determination in the set of her jaw that was entirely new. "Valentia," she whispered, testing the name on her tongue. It felt right, a declaration of the woman she was becoming rather than the girl she had been. A soft knock at the door drew her from her reverie. "Valentia," Elijah's voice called. "May I come in?" "Yes," she replied, setting down the brush and turning to face the door. Elijah entered, freshly bathed and changed into clean clothing. He paused in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Valentia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. Your sister has been very kind." "Ellen has a gift for making people feel at home," Elijah agreed, crossing the room to stand before her. "How are you feeling?" "Truly overwhelmed," Valentia admitted. "Everything has happened so quickly. A week ago I was locked in that shed, believing I would die there. Now I'm in Denver with a new name, a new chance at life." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "With you." Elijah reached out to take her hands in his. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about needing time and patience." His thumbs traced gentle patterns on her palms. "I want you to know that I meant what I said. There's no rush, Valentia. We have all the time in the world to discover who we are together." "And who are we?" she asked softly. A smile touched his lips. "I don't know yet. That's the beauty of it. But I know who you are, a woman of extraordinary courage and resilience. And I know who I am when I'm with you, a better version of myself than I ever thought possible." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. Standing on tiptoe, Valentia pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Elijah, for everything." Dinner that evening was a lively affair. James Harrington proved to be a perfect complement to his wife, thoughtful where she was spirited, methodical where she was intuitive. He welcomed Valentia with the same warmth Ellen had shown, asking no questions about her past, but making it clear through word and gesture that she was safe in their home. The conversation flowed easily, touching on local politics, literature, and the latest developments in the growing city. Valentia found herself drawn into discussions of books she had read and opinions she had formed, intellectual exchanges that had been forbidden during her marriage to George. "You should visit the library while you're here," Ellen suggested, as they lingered over coffee and dessert. "Denver's quite proud of it, and rightly so. James serves on the board of trustees." "I'd like that," Valentia replied sincerely. "It's been too long since I've had access to books." "Perhaps we could go tomorrow," Elijah suggested. "I'd enjoy showing you some of the city." "Excellent idea," James agreed. "But first, we should discuss practical matters." He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "Elijah's letter mentioned you need assistance establishing a new identity. That's something I can help with through proper legal channels." "Legal channels?" Valentia questioned, surprised. "But I thought that we'd be forging documents." James smiled slightly. "While I'm not above bending the law for a just cause in this case, there are legitimate avenues available to us. You're a widow now, officially. Your husband's death certificate will be filed in Wyoming territory within the week, thanks to some associates of mine who owe me favors." "But George isn't dead," Valentia protested, confused. "George Crawford is very much alive," Ellen clarified. "But Viola Crawford's husband perished in a tragic accident. The man Viola married no longer exists in legal terms, which means she is, for all intents and purposes, a widow. And widows," James continued, "have certain legal rights that married women do not, including the right to change their name, establish independent residency, and access any inheritance or insurance benefits." "I don't understand," Valentia said. "What inheritance?" "The one George Crawford's conscience compelled him to leave his deceased wife," James explained with a satisfied smile. "A modest sum, to be sure, but enough to establish yourself comfortably while you decide what path to pursue." Valentia looked between the three of them, astounded by the elegance of the solution. "How is this possible?" "Let's just say that George Crawford isn't the only one with connections," Ellen replied. "James has built his legal practice defending women in situations similar to yours. He knows every loophole in the system and has judges and officials throughout the territory who respect his work. By this time next week," James promised, "you'll have all the documentation you need to begin your new life as Valentia. The choice of surname is yours, of course." The reality of it, the tangible promise of freedom, left Valentia momentarily speechless. She had fled Wyoming with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope of escape. Now, sitting in this warm, welcoming home, surrounded by people who cared for her welfare, the future suddenly seemed limitless with possibility. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "Live well," Ellen said simply. "That's repayment enough." Later that evening, as Valentia prepared for her first night in a real bed since leaving Elijah's cabin, a soft knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Ellen standing there, a small wooden box in her hands. "May I come in?" the older woman asked. "I have something for you." Curious, Valentia stepped aside to admit her. Ellen crossed to the bed and sat, patting the space beside her in invitation. When Valentia joined her, she placed the box between them. "When I was 22, Ellen began, "I found myself in a situation not entirely unlike yours. The man in question was a professor at the university, brilliant, charming, and utterly ruthless in his manipulation." She touched the box gently. "I was fortunate. I escaped before the relationship became legally binding, though not before suffering considerable damage to both body and spirit." Valentia listened in shocked silence. Ellen's confident demeanor gave no hint of such a painful past. "My mother gave me this when I finally told her what had happened," Ellen continued, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver pendant on a chain. "It's been passed down through the women in our family for generations." The design is a phoenix, the mythical bird that rises from its own ashes, reborn and stronger than before. She lifted the necklace from its velvet nest. "I wore it every day until I met James, until I was certain I had truly risen from the ashes of what that man tried to make of me. Now I'd like you to have it." "Oh, Ellen, I couldn't possibly," Valentia began, overwhelmed by the gesture. "You can and you will," Ellen interrupted firmly, in a tone so reminiscent of her brother that Valentia couldn't help but smile. "Consider it a loan if that makes it easier to accept. Wear it until you no longer need the reminder of your own strength. Then, someday, pass it on to another woman who needs it." With gentle insistence, she placed the chain around Valentia's neck. The pendant settled just below her collarbone, surprisingly warm against her skin. "There," Ellen said with satisfaction. "It suits you." Valentia touched the silver phoenix, feeling a connection to generations of women who had faced adversity and emerged triumphant. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it." Ellen squeezed her hand. "One more thing before I leave you to rest. About my brother." Valentia felt herself tense slightly. "Yes. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you," Ellen said frankly. "Elijah has always been the steady one, the reliable one. He feels deeply but guards his heart carefully." Her expression softened. "Until now, it seems. I care for him very much," Valentia admitted, seeing no reason to dissemble with this perceptive woman. "But everything has happened so quickly. We've agreed to take time to be certain." Ellen nodded approvingly. "Wise decision. True love isn't diminished by patience, quite the opposite. It's strengthened." She rose, moving toward the door. "Good night, Valentia. Sleep well." "Good night, Ellen, and thank you again." After Ellen left, Valentia stood before the mirror, admiring the phoenix pendant against her skin. It seemed to glow in the lamplight, a tangible symbol of her transformation. From the ashes of Viola Crawford's life, Valentia was emerging stronger, wiser, and increasingly certain of her own worth. With that comforting thought, she extinguished the lamp and slipped beneath the covers, falling into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she had known in years. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that was both novel and deeply satisfying to Valentia. Each day brought new discoveries about Denver, about herself, and about the man who had rescued her from that shed in Wyoming. True to his word, Elijah showed her the city, guiding her through its bustling streets and quiet parks with equal enthusiasm. They visited the library, where Valentia discovered contemporary authors whose works had been forbidden by George. They attended concerts in the park, picnicked by Cherry Creek, and spent hours simply walking, talking, learning each other's minds and hearts with unhurried pleasure. James proved as good as his promise regarding her legal status. Within 2 weeks, Valentia had official documentation of her identity, including a modest bank account containing what James described as the settlement from your late husband's estate. She chose the surname Rivers for her new beginning, inspired by the constant movement and renewal of water, Valentia Rivers. A name chosen, not given or imposed. A name that felt like freedom. With her new identity secured, Valentia began exploring possibilities for her future. Ellen introduced her to the headmistress of a respected girls' school who was seeking an assistant librarian. The position offered modest but sufficient pay, along with the opportunity to share her love of literature with young minds eager for knowledge. "It would be perfect for you," Ellen encouraged after the initial interview. "Miss Pembroke was clearly impressed by your knowledge of classical literature." "It does appeal to me," Valentia admitted, "but I'm not certain I'm ready to settle into such a defined path just yet." "The truth," which she hesitated to voice even to herself, was that any decision about her future in Denver was inextricably linked to her developing relationship with Elijah. Though he had extended his stay beyond the original plan, mentioning occasional telegrams from the ranch that suggested his presence wasn't urgently required, Valentia knew he would eventually return to Wyoming. The question that haunted her quiet moments was whether she would go with him when that time came. Their courtship, for that was what it had become, acknowledged by both though never formally declared, progressed with a sweetness that sometimes brought tears to Valentia's eyes. Elijah was unfailingly considerate of her boundaries, never pushing for more intimacy than she freely offered, yet making no secret of his deepening feelings. "I never thought I could feel this way about anyone," he confessed one evening as they walked along the river, the setting sun painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. "It's as if I was waiting for you without realizing it." Valentia's heart swelled at his words. "I feel the same," she admitted, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes I wonder if all the pain was somehow necessary, if it was the only path that could have led me to you." Elijah stopped walking, turning to face her with sudden intensity. "Never think that," he said firmly. "You deserved none of what happened to you. If there had been any justice in the world, you would have been spared that suffering." "But then we might never have met," Valentia pointed out gently. "We would have found each other," Elijah insisted, his certainty absolute. "Some connections are inevitable, Valentia. I believe ours is one of them." The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within her, a sense of rightness, of coming home. Acting on impulse, she rose on tiptoe and kissed him, pouring all her unspoken feelings into the gesture. Elijah responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. The kiss deepened, transcending their previous careful exchanges to become something urgent and essential. When they finally separated, both were breathless, their eyes reflecting mutual wonder. "I love you," Elijah said simply, the words falling between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that changed everything. "I've known it since that night in the line shack during the storm. I love you, Valentia Rivers, and I will love you for all the days of my life if you'll let me." Joy rose in Valentia's chest, bright and powerful. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling like both a revelation and a homecoming. "I think I've loved you since you broke that lock and offered me your hand instead of your judgment." Elijah's smile was radiant in the fading light. "Then what happens now?" he asked, echoing her question from days earlier. Valentia considered carefully before answering. "Now we continue as we have been learning each other, building something solid and true, and when the time comes for you to return to Wyoming." "Yes," Elijah prompted when she hesitated. "I'll go with you," Valentia finished, the decision crystallizing as she spoke it aloud. "If you'll have me." "If I'll have you," Elijah repeated incredulously. "Valentia, having you by my side would make me the most fortunate man in all creation." His expression sobered slightly. "But are you certain? Wyoming holds difficult memories for you, and my cabin is a far cry from Ellen and James's comfortable home." "Home isn't a place, Elijah," Valentia replied softly. "It's a feeling, and I've never felt more at home than I do with you." The raw emotion that crossed his face at her words was something Valentia knew she would remember until her dying day. Without speaking, Elijah drew her into his arms again, holding her as if she were infinitely precious and fragile. "I will spend my life making sure you never regret that decision," he vowed, his voice rough with feeling. That night, as they walked back to the Harrington home hand in hand, Valentia felt a sense of completion she had never known before. The future stretched before them, not without challenges but rich with promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The news of their decision to return to Wyoming as a couple was met with mixed reactions from Ellen and James. While genuinely happy for their happiness, Ellen expressed concern about Valentia returning to the territory where her abuser still lived. Crawford may believe his wife is dead, she pointed out during a family dinner where the plans were discussed. But if he ever saw you, Valentia, he won't, Elijah assured his sister. The Triple R is nearly 100 miles from Silver Creek, and Crawford has no reason to venture that far from his business. Besides, Valentia added with quiet determination, I refuse to let fear of that man dictate where I can live. Wyoming is a vast territory. It's big enough for both of us. Ellen studied her thoughtfully, then nodded with grudging approval. You've changed since you arrived, Valentia. There's a strength in you now that shines through. It was always there, Elijah said, his gaze warm as it rested on Valentia. It just needed the right conditions to flourish. The weeks preceding their departure were filled with preparations. Valentia, with Ellen's enthusiastic assistance, acquired a practical wardrobe suitable for ranch life. James helped Elijah finalize the legal aspects of Valentia's new identity, ensuring her protection should questions ever arise about her past. Most meaningful to Valentia was the letter she wrote to her sister Lily in Boston, the first contact she had been able to make with her family in over 2 years. She explained as much as she dared about her circumstances, introducing herself as Valentia Rivers and describing her plans to settle in Wyoming with a good man who treats me with kindness and respect. I hope to see you someday soon, she wrote in conclusion. Perhaps you might even visit us at the ranch when you're a bit older. Until then, know that I think of you every day and that I am, at last, truly happy. Posting the letter felt like closing one chapter of her life and opening another, a recognition that, while she could never reclaim what had been lost, she could build something new and beautiful from the ruins. On their final evening in Denver, Ellen and James hosted a small dinner party in their honor. The guests included a few close friends who had come to know Valentia during her stay, the head mistress of the girls' school, a doctor and his wife who were James's closest confidants, and the elderly bookseller who had become Valentia's regular chess opponent during afternoon visits to his shop. To new beginnings, James toasted, raising his glass, and to finding love in unexpected places. The gathering was warm and intimate, filled with genuine affection and good wishes. As Valentia looked around the table at these people who had welcomed her so completely into their lives, she felt a surge of gratitude so profound, it momentarily robbed her of speech. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Ellen drew Valentia aside. I have something for you, she said, pressing a small package into Valentia's hands. A parting gift. Unwrapping it, Valentia discovered a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of intertwined vines and flowers. Inside, the pages were blank, waiting to be filled. For your new life, Ellen explained. Every story deserves to be recorded, especially one as remarkable as yours. Touched beyond words, Valentia embraced the woman who had become like a sister to her in these precious weeks. Thank you for everything, Ellen. I don't know what I would have done without you, without all of you. You would have found your way, Ellen replied with certainty, but I'm glad we could help smooth the path a little. She pulled back, her expression suddenly serious. Promise me one thing, Valentia, anything. If you ever need help, any kind of help, you'll send word immediately. Don't let pride or concern for our safety prevent you from reaching out. I promise, Valentia assured her, recognizing the genuine worry behind the request. Ellen nodded, satisfied. Good. And know that you'll always have a home here, should you ever need or want it. The journey back to Wyoming was vastly different from their flight to Denver. They traveled openly, by stagecoach and train where possible, taking their time and enjoying the changing landscape. Valentia, no longer looking over her shoulder in fear, found herself appreciating the raw beauty of the territory that would soon be her home. As they neared the Triple R, Elijah grew increasingly animated, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his childhood adventures. His obvious love for the land was contagious, and Valentia found herself eager to see the ranch that had shaped the man she loved. They crested a rise late on their 5th day of travel, and the valley spread before them like a painting lush grasslands bordered by distant mountains, herds of cattle grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. At the center of it all stood the ranch house, a substantial 2-story structure of logs and stone with several outbuildings clustered nearby. "There it is," Elijah said, a note of pride in his voice. "The Triple R, not as grand as some, but solid as the mountains behind it." "It's beautiful," Valentia said sincerely, taking in the picturesque scene. As they rode closer, figures emerged from the main house, a tall man who shared Elijah's build, a petite woman with a child on her hip, and 2 young boys who raced toward them with whoops of excitement. "Uncle Elijah." "Uncle Elijah," the children called, reaching the horses before the adults. Elijah dismounted with a laugh, sweeping both boys into his arms in a bear hug that left them giggling breathlessly. "Look how you've grown. You'll be taller than me soon, Daniel." The adults approached at a more measured pace, though their welcome was no less warm. Elijah's brother, Edward, embraced him with backslapping enthusiasm, while his wife, Margaret, balanced their youngest child with practiced ease as she kissed Elijah's cheek. "About time you came home," Edward said gruffly, though his eyes shone with genuine pleasure. "The horses have been missing you something fierce." "Just the horses," Elijah teased. "Well, Ma's been asking after you too," Edward conceded with a grin. Then his gaze shifted to Valentia, who remained mounted on Willow, suddenly shy in the face of this family reunion. Elijah immediately moved to help her dismount, his hand lingering supportively at her waist as he turned to make introductions. "Edward, Margaret, boys, this is Valentia Rivers." "Valentia, my brother Edward and his wife Margaret and their sons Daniel and Thomas. The little one is Sarah, newest addition to the Montgomery clan." "Welcome to the Triple R, Miss Rivers," Edward said, offering his hand with genuine hospitality. "Thank you for having me," Valentia replied, finding her voice. "Elijah has told me so much about all of you and this beautiful place." "All good things, I hope," Margaret said with a warm smile, shifting little Sarah to her other hip. "Come inside. You must be exhausted after your journey, and dinner's nearly ready." The family home proved as welcoming inside as out, spacious rooms filled with sturdy, well-crafted furniture, and touches that spoke of generations of family life. Photographs and mementos lined the walls, documenting the Montgomery family's history from their early days as pioneers to their current prosperity. Elijah's parents, Samuel and Rebecca Montgomery, greeted them in the large kitchen where preparations for dinner were underway. Samuel was a tall, imposing figure with a full beard now more silver than brown, while Rebecca was a slender woman whose graceful movements belied her advancing years. "So this is the young lady who's captured our Elijah's heart," Rebecca said after embracing her son, her keen eyes assessing Valentia with friendly interest. "He wrote of little else in his letters from Denver." "Ma," Elijah protested, a flush rising to his cheeks. "Hush, boy." "I'm too old for pretense," Rebecca replied good-naturedly before turning back to Valentia. "You're most welcome here, Miss Rivers. Any woman who can put that look in my son's eyes is family as far as I'm concerned." The simple acceptance offered without question or reservation brought a lump to Valentia's throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. I can't tell you what that means to me." "Rebecca, please," the older woman insisted. "And that old bear is Samuel, though he'll answer to Sam if he knows what's good for him." Samuel Montgomery stepped forward, his weathered face creasing in a smile that transformed his stern appearance. "Don't let her fool you," he said in a rumbling bass. "She's the one who runs this outfit. I just pretend to be in charge for the sake of my dignity." Dinner that evening was a boisterous affair, with 3 generations of Montgomerys gathered around the long oak table. Conversation flowed freely, punctuated by laughter and good-natured arguments about everything from cattle prices to politics to the proper way to break a wild horse. Valentia, seated beside Elijah with young Thomas on her other side, found herself drawn effortlessly into the family dynamic. No one pressed her for details about her past, accepting Elijah's simple explanation that they had met during his travels and fallen in love in Denver. Instead, they asked about her interests, her impressions of the ranch, her thoughts on various topics that arose during the meal. By the time Rebecca served her famous apple pie for dessert, Valentia felt as if she had known these people for years rather than hours. There was an ease to their acceptance, a genuineness to their welcome that soothed a wound she hadn't fully acknowledged: the loss of her own family, scattered and unreachable. After dinner, as the women cleared the table, Valentia insisting on helping despite Rebecca's protests that guests shouldn't work, Elijah and his father stepped outside for what Samuel described as a bit of father-son palaver. "Don't look so worried," Margaret whispered to Valentia as they dried dishes side by side. "Sam's gruff, but he thinks the world of Elijah, and he can see how happy you make him." "I hope so," Valentia replied. "Elijah speaks of his father with such respect. I want very much for him to approve of me, of us." "Trust me," Rebecca interjected, overhearing as she put away the last of the serving dishes. "If Samuel Montgomery had any objections, you'd know it already. He's never been one to hold his tongue when something displeases him." She patted Valentia's arm reassuringly. "The fact that he's out there right now, no doubt discussing your future together, is all the proof you need of his approval." Sure enough, when Elijah and Samuel returned, there was a settled quality to Elijah's expression, a quiet joy that made Valentia's heart skip. "Pa's offered us the old foreman's cabin," he told her as they gathered around the fireplace for after-dinner coffee. "It's been empty since Hank built his new place closer to the stables. It needs some work, but it would be ours." The implication was clear. Samuel Montgomery was not only accepting their relationship, but actively facilitating their future on the ranch. Valentia looked to the older man, who nodded slightly in confirmation. "It's a solid structure," he said matter-of-factly. "Good location, not too far from the main house but with plenty of privacy. Elijah says you're handy with a needle and thread. The place could use a woman's touch." "That's very generous," Valentia said, deeply moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery." "Sam," he corrected gruffly. "And it's not generosity, it's family taking care of family." His eyes, so like Elijah's in shape if not in color, held her steadily. "Which is what you are now, Miss Rivers. Family." Later that night, as Valentia prepared for bed in the room Rebecca had assigned her notably separate from Elijah's, a nod to propriety that amused rather than offended, she reflected on the day's events with a sense of wonder. In the space of hours, she had been embraced by an entire family, offered a home, and made to feel as if she truly belonged. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Elijah standing there, his expression a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "I just wanted to say good night," he said softly, And to make sure you're comfortable, I know it's a lot, meeting everyone at once." "They're wonderful," Valentia assured him, stepping back to invite him into the room. "All of them. I can see why you love this place so much." Elijah entered, careful to leave the door partially open in deference to his mother's rules. "They like you too," he said, taking her hands in his. "Pa doesn't offer the foreman's cabin to just anyone. He must really approve." "I'm glad," Valentia replied sincerely. "Their opinion matters to you, so it matters to me." Elijah's gaze softened as he looked at her. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "About us and the cabin and everything. What have you been thinking?" Valentia prompted when he hesitated. Taking a deep breath, Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. When he opened his palm, Valentia saw a simple gold band set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 smaller sapphires. "It was my grandmother's," Elijah explained, his voice husky with emotion. "Pa gave it to me tonight, said it was time it adorned the hand of the next Montgomery bride." He met her eyes directly. "If you'll have me, that is." Valentia's breath caught in her throat. Though she had known they were moving toward marriage, the reality of his proposal, the tangible proof of his commitment in the form of this family heirloom, overwhelmed her. "Elijah," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I know it's soon," he said quickly, misinterpreting her emotion. "We can wait as long as you need. I just wanted you to know my intentions are—" "Yes," Valentia interrupted, her voice strengthening. "Yes, Elijah Montgomery, I will marry you. Not because I need more time to be sure, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and all-encompassing. With trembling fingers, he slipped the ring onto her hand, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. "I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you," he vowed, drawing her into his arms. "As I will you," Valentia replied, rising on tiptoe to seal their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Valentia's life. She and Elijah threw themselves into renovating the foreman's cabin, transforming it from a utilitarian bachelor's quarters into a true home. The Montgomery family pitched in enthusiastically, Samuel and Edward handling structural repairs, Rebecca and Margaret offering advice on furnishings and practical arrangements, even the children contributing by gathering wildflowers to plant around the porch. Valentia discovered an unexpected talent for interior design, repurposing furniture from the ranch's attic and adding touches that reflected both her tastes and Elijah's. A bookshelf he built to her specifications became home to volumes purchased during their time in Denver. Curtains she sewed from fabric Rebecca had been saving for a special occasion softened the cabin's rustic lines. A quilt frame set up in the corner of the main room promised winter evenings spent in creative pursuit. As the wedding day approached, set for midsummer, when the wildflowers would be at their peak, Valentia found herself embraced not just by the Montgomery family, but by the wider community of ranchers and townspeople who made up their social circle. Rebecca hosted a gathering of neighboring women to introduce her future daughter-in-law, while Samuel made a point of taking Valentia along when he and Elijah visited the nearest town for supplies. "Let folks see you together," he explained with practical wisdom. "Best way to silence gossip before it starts is to be open and proud of your connection." And there was gossip, inevitably. The mysterious young woman who had appeared suddenly in Elijah Montgomery's life, with no family connections and a past she was reluctant to discuss in detail, naturally aroused curiosity. But Samuel's strategy proved effective. The genuine affection between Valentia and Elijah was apparent to anyone who saw them together, and the Montgomery family's wholehearted approval carried significant weight in a community where they were respected as founding members. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected letter arrived, a response from Lily, Valentia's younger sister in Boston. The envelope, addressed to Miss Valentia Rivers, care of Triple R Ranch, contained several closely written pages that Valentia read with tears streaming down her face. "I knew you couldn't be dead," Lily had written. "When Mr. Crawford wrote to say you had perished in an accident, something in me refused to believe it. I've prayed every day for news that you were alive, and now my prayers have been answered." The letter went on to detail Lily's life with their aunt, a strict but not unkind arrangement that had allowed her to continue her education. Now 17, she was finishing her studies at a respectable ladies' academy and contemplating her future. "Aunt Beatrice says I might become a teacher, though her preference would be a suitable marriage," Lily wrote. "But I find myself drawn to medicine, inspired by the woman physician who treated Aunt's rheumatism last winter. She says there are now colleges that accept female students for medical training, though the idea scandalizes Aunt terribly." Most precious to Valentia was Lily's response to the news of her engagement. "I cannot express my joy at learning you have found a good man who treasures you as you deserve. After what you endured with Mr. Crawford, yes, I knew, though you tried to shield me from the truth. This seems like justice of the most poetic kind. I long to meet your Elijah and to see this Wyoming that has given you a new home and a new name." The letter concluded with news that sent Valentia racing to find Elijah, who was working with a young horse in the corral. "Lily wants to come for the wedding," she called, waving the letter excitedly. "She says her term at school ends just in time, and her aunt has given permission provided she travels with a suitable companion." Elijah's face lit with pleasure at her obvious joy. "That's wonderful news. We'll wire the train fare immediately." And perhaps Ellen and James would be willing to meet her in Chicago for the final leg of the journey. Plans were quickly made. James and Ellen, already intending to travel for the wedding, readily agreed to extend their journey eastward to escort young Lily from Chicago. Valentia, who had resigned herself to having no blood family present for her marriage, found herself overwhelmed by the prospect of reuniting with her beloved sister after so many years of separation. "It's all coming together so perfectly," she told Elijah as they sat on the porch of their nearly completed cabin, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of rose and gold. "Sometimes I'm afraid to believe it's real that I deserve such happiness." Elijah took her hand, his thumb tracing the outline of his grandmother's ring. "You deserve this and more," he said with quiet conviction, "and I intend to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never doubt it." Valentia leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I never thought I would feel safe again," she admitted. "After George, I believed that part of me was broken beyond repair, but with you, with your family, with this place." She gestured toward the sprawling ranch, now bathed in the day's final light. "I've found more than safety. I've found home." Elijah's arm tightened around her shoulders. "That's all I want to be for you, Valentia. Your safe harbor. Your home." The day of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of the union. Valentia woke in the main house, where tradition had dictated she spend her last night as a single woman, to find Rebecca already bustling about with preparations. No bride should have to worry about anything on her wedding day except being beautiful, the older woman declared, shooing Valentia back to bed with a tray of breakfast. "You just rest. Margaret and I have everything well in hand." But rest proved impossible with excitement coursing through her veins. After a token attempt at eating, Valentia rose to bathe and prepare for the ceremony that would take place at noon in the flower-filled meadow behind the main house. As she dressed in the simple but elegant gown Ellen had helped her select in Denver ivory silk with delicate lace trim, modest yet flattering to her slender figure, a knock sounded at the door. "Valentia," a hesitant voice called. "It's Lily. May I come in?" Valentia's heart leaped at the sound of her sister's voice. "Yes, please come in." The door opened to reveal a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, her features a softer version of Valentia's own, her eyes wide with emotion. For a moment, the sisters stared at each other, absorbing the changes that time and experience had wrought. Then, with a cry that held years of longing, they rushed into each other's arms. "I can't believe it's really you," Lily sobbed, clinging to her sister. "When I received your letter, when I learned you were alive, I know," Valentia murmured, stroking her sister's hair. "I know, my darling. I'm so sorry for all the time we lost." They held each other for long moments, neither willing to let go. When they finally separated, both were laughing through their tears. "Look at us," Valentia said, reaching for a handkerchief. "We'll ruin our complexions before the ceremony even begins." "Worth it," Lily declared, studying her sister's face hungrily. "You look so beautiful, Val, and happy." "So very happy." "I am," Valentia confirmed, squeezing her sister's hands. "Happier than I ever believed possible, and having you here makes it perfect." They spent the next hour in gentle conversation, Lily helping with the final touches to Valentia's appearance, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style, securing the veil that Rebecca had worn at her own wedding, and fastening Ellen's phoenix pendant around her neck. "Something borrowed," Lily said, touching the silver charm. "Though Ellen told me she hopes you'll keep it forever." As noon approached, Samuel Montgomery appeared at the door, resplendent in his best suit, his beard neatly trimmed for the occasion. "It's time, daughter," he said, offering his arm. "Your groom is waiting, and if his pacing wears any more of a path in the grass, we'll have to reseed the entire meadow." Valentia laughed, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had so readily claimed her as family. "I'm ready," she said, taking his arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Valentia. She would later remember fragments with perfect clarity, the look of wonder on Elijah's face as she walked toward him on Samuel's arm, the scent of wildflowers that decorated the simple arch where they stood, the weight of the plain gold band as Elijah slid it onto her finger beside his grandmother's ring, the minister's deep voice pronouncing them husband and wife. But most of all, she would remember the moment when Elijah lifted her veil and looked into her eyes with such profound love that it seemed to illuminate her from within. As their lips met in their first kiss as a married couple, applause and cheers erupted from the gathered guests' family, friends, and neighbors who had come to celebrate their union. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with tables set up under the trees and food enough to feed twice the number of guests. There was music and dancing, laughter and a few sentimental tears, all the traditional elements of a country wedding executed with the warm hospitality for which the Montgomerys were known. As the celebration continued into the evening, Elijah found Valentia in conversation with Ellen and Lily, their heads bent together in conspiratorial closeness. "May I steal my wife for a dance?" he asked, the word wife bringing a fresh wave of happiness to Valentia's heart. "I suppose we can spare her," Ellen replied with a teasing smile, "but only because you ask so nicely." On the improvised dance floor, Elijah pulled Valentia close, swaying to the gentle melody played by a local fiddler and his companions. "Happy, Mrs. Montgomery," he murmured against her hair. "Completely," Valentia assured him, tilting her face up to his. Though I still can't quite believe it's real, that I'm really your wife, that this is our life now." "Believe it," Elijah said, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the lantern strung among the trees. "This is just the beginning, Valentia. We have our whole lives ahead of us, years and years to build something beautiful together." As twilight deepened into night, the newly wedded couple bid farewell to their guests and made their way to their cabin, now fully prepared for their occupation. Candles had been lit in every window, casting a welcoming glow that guided them home. Inside, they found unexpected touches: fresh flowers in a vase on the table, a bottle of champagne chilling beside two crystal glasses, a wedding gift from James and Ellen, and the bed turned down invitingly, strewn with rose petals in a romantic gesture that made them both laugh with delight. "Rebecca's work, I'd wager," Elijah said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "My mother, the incurable romantic." "I like it," Valentia decided, touching a petal gently. "It's beautiful." As the night deepened around their small haven, Elijah and Valentia came together as husband and wife, their union a testament to the healing power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. In each other's arms, they found not just passion, but a profound sense of homecoming, of two souls finding their perfect complement after long journeys through darkness and light. Later, as Valentia lay in the circle of Elijah's embrace, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, she reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her to this moment. From the terrified woman locked in a shed for crying too loudly to the beloved wife of a good man, cherished and respected for exactly who she was, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it had happened one step at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage building upon another, until she had reclaimed not just her freedom but her very self. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Elijah asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. Valentia smiled in the darkness. "About names," she replied. "About how the name you gave me that first night, Valentia, helped me become the person I am now, as if in naming me you saw who I could be before I saw it myself." Elijah's arms tightened around her. "I only gave you the word," he murmured. "The strength, the courage, the spirit, those were always yours, Valentia. Always." 5 years later, Valentia stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Elijah taught their 4-year-old son, Samuel, to ride his first pony. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the softer coos of their 6-month-old daughter, Eleanor, who rested contentedly in her mother's arms. The years had brought changes to the Triple R Edwards sons, growing tall and capable, Rebecca and Samuel gradually ceding more responsibility to the younger generation, the ranch itself prospering under their combined stewardship. Valentia had found her place within this family and this land, contributing not just as Elijah's wife, but as a valued member of the community in her own right. She had started a small school for the children of the ranch workers and neighboring homesteads, teaching 3 days a week in a converted outbuilding. Her sister Lily, now in her final year of medical studies in Philadelphia, financed in part by the proceeds from the sale of Valentia's Denver property, wrote regularly of her progress and her plans to establish a practice in Wyoming upon graduation. "She'll likely set up in Cheyenne initially," Valentia had told Elijah just that morning, reading from Lily's latest letter. "But she hopes to move closer to us eventually. Says there's a great need for doctors in the smaller communities, especially those willing to treat women and children." "The Triple R would welcome its own physician," Elijah had replied with enthusiasm. "Your sister will never lack for patients in these parts." Now, watching her husband and son together, Samuel's small face a mirror of Elijah's in concentration. And Valentia felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. This life they had built together, this family they had created, was more than she had dared to dream possible in her darkest days. Little Elena stirred against her shoulder, and Valentia pressed a gentle kiss to her daughter's downy head. "Look at your brother, sweetheart," she murmured. "One day soon you'll be riding too. Your father will teach you, just as he's teaching Samuel." As if sensing her thoughts, Elijah looked up from adjusting Samuel's grip on the reins. His smile, directed at her across the yard, held all the love and partnership of their years together, the joys and sorrows they had shared, the challenges they had overcome, the deep, abiding connection that had only strengthened with time. In that smile, Valentia saw their future unfolding years of watching their children grow, of working side by side on the land they both loved, of growing old together in this home they had created from love and hope and second chances. "Mama, look!" Samuel called excitedly as the pony took a few steps forward under his guidance. "I'm doing it. I see you, my brave boy," Valentia called back, her heart full. "I'm so proud of you." As she stood there in the golden light of late afternoon, her daughter in her arms and her son and husband before her, Elijah Montgomery, once Viola Crawford, once a woman locked in a shed for crying too loudly, knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true name and her true self at last. Not in the shed where Elijah had found her, broken and afraid. Not in the careful legal documents James had arranged in Denver. Not even in the sacred vows she and Elijah had exchanged on their wedding day. But here, in this ordinary moment of family life, in the love that surrounded her, in the strength she had claimed as her birthright, here was where Valentia had truly been born. Here was where she had become fully herself. Wife, mother, teacher, survivor, Valentia. The brave one, the strong one. The woman who had emerged from darkness into a life filled with light.